are listening to the Music Ed Mentor podcast, where we help music educators build, manage, and grow thriving school music programs and have long and happy careers. That can seem like a little overwhelming mission right now, but I'm willing to do it if you are. I am your host, Elisa Jansen-Jones, and now I'm assuming if you are like most music educators, you are a little more than burned out when it comes to online teaching and learning and worrying about what next school year is going to look like. How will you have to adapt your classroom culture? How will you keep your room clean? Will you be able to play instruments or even to sing? Will they be putting up plexiglass in your room? Will you have to be able to have more than 6 students in the class at a time, or even can you? Will you have more courses to teach or fewer? Will you be in the gym and spread out, or maybe even in the stadium? Well, I'm happy to say that in this episode, we aren't talking about any of that. In fact, this episode was recorded before the pandemic was even a thing. I'm going to put on my big mentor hat right now and say that one of the best things you can be doing is not worrying about what next year is going to look like. That is the job of your administration, of the states, of the districts, and when they finally have some guidance for you, then you still don't have to worry. That's when you get to plan. Now, definitely, you can be doing some advocacy, but you should also be doing some things for yourself. Now is a great time to relax and to focus on some personal and professional development. If you're going to have to adapt your classroom to other topics of teaching and other types of music, you may as well give it a go when you don't have to do it with students in the classroom. That's why I chose to treat you to this episode today, where I bring on the formidable and inspiring Christine Bass. Christine is one of the most prolific adjudicators and clinicians in the choral world, and for good reason. She is outstanding. I have been a singer most of my life, and she has taught me more than a thing or two in this episode alone. I've had the privilege of watching her present 4 times in online conferences since the beginning of April, and I've learned something new every single time. She has an approach that is so approachable and techniques that are so tangible and teachable. If you're looking for some practical ways to improve yourself as a musician, focus on being a good singer, and it will improve your students as singers as well. You won't find a more practical approach than what she will give you in this episode today. Think of it as a sort of break from all that worry and stress about next school year, and just take this as a chance to work on some pedagogy. After all, our voice is the one instrument we take with us everywhere we go. You don't have to worry about if your music students have their instrument at home or not, as long as they have their voice. And teaching your band students or your orchestra students or your rock band students or your general music students how to sing will absolutely improve their musicianship overall. Before we jump in, though, a big thank you to Smart Music for supporting this podcast and making it happen for 76 episodes. I can hardly believe that we've been at this for 3 years now, and looking back on the content we've created absolutely takes my breath away. If you haven't had a chance to scroll back through the past episodes and take a listen, you may find something that will absolutely shift the way that you're thinking about music education. Smart Music has always been committed to music teachers and music education, and they will continue to be so long after this pandemic has passed. And yes, you can use Smart Music for choral and vocal training too. Now, without further ado, let's learn how to be and how to teach Better Singing and Singers with Christine Bass.
My name is Christine Bass, and I currently reside in New Jersey. Just retired last spring from Temple University, and I'm just starting this week at Rowan University in South Jersey, teaching. Well, I'm teaching choral conducting this semester, but at Temple I taught all the music ed choral classes and then conducted the women's and men's choruses. And prior to that, I was teaching in the public schools for 28 years. 22 of them were in Cherry Hill High School West, which is in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, in just growing the program and getting everything running and flying. And we did a lot of national conventions and things like that. And so it was a great time.
Wow, you are very accomplished for a 35-year-old.
Oh no, I've been teaching for 45 years. Anything from a 35-year-old, yeah.
Well, you're the absolute perfect person to be teaching us today how to be a choir teacher if that wasn't our option in college. I know in my experience, I've been singing since I was about 3 years old, and I
Hmm.
sang in musicals and in choirs in high school. And then when I got to college, I did our a cappella choir and chamber choir, and I took voice lessons. And then came the dreaded day when my instrumental methods class, in this case, it was clarinet, happened to be at the same time as chamber choir. And I had to choose
Oh,
if, if I was going to go the instrumental track or the vocal track. Have you heard this story before?
I've heard a lot of stories similar to this, yes.
And we are kind of forced into this, which way are we going to go? Teach choir or teach
Right,
instrumental? And the fact of the matter is that ideal as it would be for us to follow a choral track and then get a choral job, or for do an instrumental track and get an instrumental only job, chances are good we're going to have to swap it around at some point, right?
exactly. Yep. Hmm.
So what do we do where do we even start as an instrumental teacher who just got hired to teach maybe one or two choir classes?
Right. Well, it depends on your university experience. At Temple, we had a couple of great classes for all our music educators, and they had to take general music methods, they had to take instrumental music methods, and they had to take choral music methods, regardless of what their concentration was. So for that, they at least got some background in what is it like to be in front of an instrumental group, or what is it like to be in front of a choir. If you didn't get that in college, which a lot of people did not, and you find yourself in front of a choir, it's really intimidating because that's not your specialty, it's not your wheelhouse, and you feel like, okay, I can do the musical part, but I can't do the choral part, I can't do the singing part. And I would feel the same way if I was in front of a methods class to teach French horn and tuba and trumpet. I'm not qualified in that, so quickly I would have to become qualified. I think it's perhaps a little easier to get the vocal skills going. There's not as many fingering positions and different instruments to learn. However, I think it is really just as complex to do a great job. So I would break it down initially to making sure that you, as the teacher in a choral classroom, regardless of your background, would have some singing ability, singing experience in an ensemble. So the first thing I would say is get some voice lessons, or get in a community choir or a volunteer choir, church, synagogue, and find out what it's like to be in the chorus if you haven't already done so. A lot of people are required to be in a choir as they go through and they get their degree. So hopefully that's happened and you have a little bit of experience at being in choir. It's not the same thing as directing it, though, and that's how we can talk further about the different aspects.
Well, what are some well, you mentioned conducting, and I can't help but ask, do choral conductors use a baton?
Typically, they don't. I prefer not to. I just feel like my hands are far more expressive than a stick. But I do use it when I'm in front of an instrumental ensemble that is accompanying my choir, because I know instrumentalists are far more familiar with batons, although not always. And so I think it's best if you are choral conductor, regardless of your background, to get used to using just your hands to be able to, express things more fluidly, less kind of strict. There's so much more that happens beyond beat keeping and showing the beat. In fact, in choral music, I think you can drop the pattern far more than in instrumental music, because you're directing concepts. So you're directing the breathing, the shaping of the phrase. It's not necessarily married to the meter in that sense. So I think being okay with using your hands and trying to get those gestures open and reflective of relaxing and the height and the sound and the final consonants. I think hands are much more able to do that than just the baton.
I'm so happy to hear you say that. I even, in my community band experience, we did O Magnum Mysterium,
Mm-hmm.
and I put down the baton and conducted with my hands because it was originally a choral piece, and this just happened to have been arranged for band.
Mm,
And I was impressed with how incredibly expressive the band was and responsive to my
that's really
conducting.
neat. Yeah.
So I digress though. Let's back up away from conducting. I want to come back to that. But let's start with just what does our choral rehearsal look like? What do warm-ups look like?
Right. Well, a choral rehearsal is really a sequential scaffolding. So every choral rehearsal needs to start with warming up, which is not warming up the voice, it's warming up the body first. So you have to start with posture. I mean, not like instrumental. Your body is your instrument as a singer, so it's not something we can just pick out of a case and put together and hope that and tune it and work it. You've got to get the posture going. So balance and alignment. I use the Alexander method for posture. The 6 points of balance from the arches of the feet, knees, hips, the small of the back, which is not a joint, but still is in that balance, the shoulders, and then the ears over the shoulders. And I think so much of our struggle today with choral music is rooted in the posture, because kids nowadays, they look at their phone, they have a book bag that weighs 35 pounds, they have all kinds of things to get them out of alignment. And they really need to figure out, oh, wait, this is what the body is made for. I mean, I'm sure you've seen those commercials of those things that you can put on, like straps and things that make your posture look good. It's almost like you need to find one of those for every one of your choir members so that they are okay with putting their shoulders over their hips. And even when they're sitting, they have to have that. They can't have anything leaning forward. The neck can't be jutting forward. All of that is a part of their instrument. So I would always start with alignment and stretching and getting things. The other thing to remember as a singer is at the top of your spine, the base of your skull, is your AO joint, your atlas occiput joint, and that needs to be very loose. So I always kind of make an analogy of Stevie Wonder. You know how he moves his head back and forth, and he's really chilling there. And I'm like, you have to have a chilling head, but yet the rest of your body has to be really intense and strong. So it's this dichotomy between where is the relaxation and where is the energy. That is probably different from a lot of instrumentalists. Another thing that's, I think, very, very different from instrumentalists is the breathing. I know the kids that I've had, my instrumentalists that I've had for my choral methods classes, get really confused with what a singer's breath is and what a singer's breath management looks like, because perhaps they were told in their brass methods, you put a piece of paper against the wall and you blow and you keep that paper on there and you keep a steady pressure. That's great for being a wind player. But for singing, it's actually the opposite. We inhale the breath and we keep the breath underneath the sound. So it's like, inhaling an inner tube all around your middle, keeping that air inside and not really using up the air until the very end. And that is a huge difference for an instrumentalist, I think. So I'll often, is it okay if I sing?
Of course.
Miss? Okay. I'll often take a phrase and then have the students exhale the extra air afterwards. For instance, if they were going to do and then they blow it all out, rather than you know what I mean, pushing the air out. You don't want to push the air out. You want to keep the air underneath the chords, and it just, sure, there is a certain amount that comes out, but it's not anything like blowing out or pushing out like you have in instrumental music for wind instruments. So I think there is a huge difference for people to understand and be able to work on. So yeah, breathing is a huge issue. I don't know if you have any further questions about that, but that's just one of the ways I try to address it.
Okay. Okay. What are some common pitfalls that we might run into that we should try and avoid when taking over a choral techniques class?
Right. Well, one of them is with our initial breath. And I don't know if you've seen this, and it's not just instrumentalists that do it. Some choral musicians do it too, and it's wrong. They have the closed throat breath, and they use that auditory sound as this is where you breathe, here we go, if your choir or your instrumentalist is looking down at their music. So it might be your pattern 1, 2, 3, and they actually use that auditory sound as a cue. Well, that should not be. They should have their eyes on you, and then 1, 2, 3, and it should be an open throat breath with no resistance, no actual inhalation sound. And that, I think, is tricky for a lot of instrumentalists, because they've been sitting under people that use that as a cue. So they think that that's part of what they're supposed to do as a director, but it's not. Your choir's not supposed to have an audible breath at all. So that's that open throat, kind of a suppressed yawn feeling. And I can't quite do it on a recording, but just really quiet and not using that as a cue for here's your breath, here's your entrance. And I don't know, have you experienced that with instrumental groups or even with choirs where the person who is directing is audibly doing the inhale?
I confess that I am guilty of doing that with my instrumental
Okay.
groups. More in practice than in performance. And
Right,
I
right.
can still remember one of my college choral teachers, directors, and
Mm-hmm.
when he would bring us in, he would take this long, and this man probably weighed 350 pounds. He was an
Oh
amazing
my.
man, but he would take this big long inhale through his nose.
Oh,
And now
yeah.
I have to laugh about it because I miss him. So
Mhm. Yeah, the nose, and some people are really um, attached to that. I don't think it's a good thing. First of all, if you take a big breath through your nose, it's not going to be as big of a breath as if you take it through the open throat. So the goal being having a great breath, and a silent inhale, a yawning breath, is going to be much more effective than a sniff. So right then and there, and plus it's just noisy. So taking a long breath is great. So let's just say the choir comes in on the 4th beat, and you have a piano introduction for the full measure. You could breathe over 1, 2, 3, and then you're in. There's nothing wrong with that. That you don't have to just go 1, 2, breath in. You do have to do that when there's shorter phrases and the phrases are on top of each other. But if you have an opportunity to take a long breath before a phrase, I totally agree with that.
okay, I see that. And if your choir's looking at your face, I mean, should they be looking at your face or your hands? Because you could realistically make a face of breathing, right, as a cue.
They should be able to look at both. I should be able to bring a choir in without my hands, just with my sternum bone lifting, taking that low breath and lifting, and having just a slight head gesture. But obviously your hands need to invite that breath in, and then have your ictus there. I think a lot of times people they don't breathe for their choirs. That's a big mistake. And if you're a string player and you're in front of a choral group, you might not think about breathing, because as a string player, you don't necessarily have to breathe to play. You can just start playing, but your choir does. So you need to breathe for them. And that's why I like to see the face as an open, expressive face when you conduct with a slight open mouth. It's very hard to sing for somebody who has a closed embouchure, a closed mouth, a closed face. So I like the eyebrows slightly lifted, the eyes real bright and alive, and the jaw just relaxed, not, overly depressed and overly extended, just open, just like you're gonna, be surprised and somebody goes, oh, that kind of surprise face. That's the face you should have. And the gesture for your breath should also be one that's down in your core, the core of your body, which I would say from your collarbone to your belly button. That's where you're going to be giving your gesture down there. You don't want to have it up high. Sometimes, marching band people, do the gesture really high and they do double gesture and all that. That's not what's needed for choral. It's just inviting the breath in and then having the initial sound happen. So I think with the mouth open, the face open, the nice quiet breath, that's what a singer is looking for in order to start. Then a lot of people have an issue with mouthing words. I do a lot of honors choirs where they don't know me that well, and sometimes they need me to mouth some words.
Mm-hmm.
They just have to see that. So there are times when it's okay. However, it gets over redundant, and then they're just watching your mouth instead of your gestures, your full body. So I think it's good to have it here and there where needed, but I think it's also great to drop it. And especially if you do a more complex piece of choral music where not everybody's singing the same words at the same time, then it doesn't make any sense for you to try to mouth words because you're going to mouth them from one part, but then the other part's going to be like, what is she doing? So I would say just an open face, an inviting face, an open throat for you as you conduct is going to help them sing with an open throat and take open throat breaths. There's some good technique in saying breathe in the shape of your open vowel. So if you're singing adoramos te, you're going to breathe through that so that you're already there rather than and then have to try and open it up. So if you breathe in the shape of the opening vowel, that sometimes is a nice concept to use. A lot of people do that.
Nice. I like to use my hands to shape the vowels too. So,
Exactly.
in
Mm-hmm.
addition to, well, first of all, I'm really happy to hear you say that they should be looking at your face and your hands because
Mm-hmm.
one of my choral conducting teachers in college used to mark me down for having my beat pattern up toward my face instead of down at my waist. For some reason,
Mm.
he really wanted us to conduct nice and low so that our elbows weren't lifting or something
I actually agree with that.
with
So
elbows low.
they have to be how low is low. That's why I said from your collarbone to your navel, in that zone, in the midsection of your body. I think right across your chest is the best place, or a little lower. And the reason for that is because the support mechanism for the voice is your abdominal muscles. So
Okay, okay.
you need to conduct where those muscles are going to engage. If you're up high by the throat, first of all, you don't want people to engage their throat. You want them to engage their body and sing up and through and over the sound. If they are just thinking about at the throat, they're not getting a good sound. You want and that rides on the breath and that rides on the support that's down with the ab muscles. And if I start to conduct up here in my throat and my shoulder area, then everything starts to be focused right there. And that's when I lose my resonance and I lose my support because I'm not thinking low enough in my body. So I understand that teacher's emphasis on conducting low, and I happen to agree with it. But they do need to watch both your hands and your face. I think
Nice.
that's certainly possible. It's not that big of a distance. And I think that once they are used to your gestures, they'll be able to read with the hands and the face. I think the face just needs to be very open and very expressive and, reflecting a singer's, I hate to use the word embouchure, but, reflecting the singer's vocal mechanisms. That's the open throat, the lifted soft palate, the resonance that's in the cheekbones. All of that should be kind of in your gesture.
So, talk to me about vocal tension in our throats, because this is a really
Right.
common thing that I hear in a lot of our music teacher groups and stuff. Is that their
Mhm.
throat ends up hurting after a long day. And I find that if my throat's hurting after singing a lot, I'm using bad technique. What are your
Yes,
thoughts?
exactly. Yes. Well, the throat, like I said, the voice passes through the air passes through the vocal bands, but it does not. Uh, it's your sound is not only produced at the vocal bands. It starts down low with your support, with your inhale. So if you take a low breath and then you engage the sound at the abdominal muscles and do an abdominal attack, or years ago it was diaphragmatic attack, but the diaphragm is an involuntary muscle, so it can't be that. It's the abs. Then you're going to get the sound generated down from where the support starts, and instead of just at the throat. So I would have my singers, to demonstrate this, put their hand on their throat at their larynx and also put their hand at their belly button and do it wrong first. Start the sound from the throat. Ah, ah, there's a glottal stroke there. There's a hit for the vocal cords to produce that sound. But if I think I'm going to start the sound way down at my belly button, and I'm going to think that the sound is it generated there and just passes up and through and over, and I have to give space to the sound, all of a sudden I have ah, ah, instead of ah, ah. So you want your students to do both the right and the wrong so they can feel the difference.
Right.
And then you want to get them settled down. And so a lot of times I'll have them sing with their hand on their belly button.
Hmm.
And just, in that belly area, yeah, actually a little bit below that, to get the idea that that's where the support is going to start. That's where the resonance, that's where all the activity begins. Not so much resonance, that was wrong, but the support really starts there, and then the sound has to be, and then this is where we get this the contradiction of intense muscles in the bottom and yet very free muscles at the top. In the throat, it should be free. In the AO joint, as I mentioned before, in the top of the spine, that should all be free. The jaw shouldn't have any tension. So that means that it's relaxed from the hinge. It's not pushed down from the hinge. So a lot of people say, drop your jaw. Well, that creates another tension. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So just leave it kind of a an easy, relaxed, but it can't be forward, because that creates this kind of thing. It can't be locked, which is that what I find when I have singers who are, especially wind players, they have an embouchure and they want to sing at me through, either lips that are, or for some kind of embouchure, or a jaw position that is more conducive to playing an instrument than it is to singing. And this is where your face needs to be all relaxed. So a lot of times I'll have them just put their chin, their finger on their chin, and just wiggle that as they sing. Oh, you don't really hear my sound going, oh, oh, it's just staying there. And so that I know that there's no tension. You can also place your fingers at both sides of your mouth and wiggle around and make sure that there's no lip tension, no embouchure tension. Because if I change vowels, that's all happening inside my mouth. Second time I sang that, I was wiggling my mouth on the outside with my fingers, but you didn't really hear any difference. But if I'm really thinking about the outside of my, I'm overdoing. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So it's all very relaxed, and keeping that embouchure area, the mouth, the chin, the jaw, just very chilling, very relaxed, and letting the sound, be picturing the sound as starting down in your support mechanism.
Okay. So we have our strong body, we have our big deep breath, our support in our belly. The sound comes up through our relaxed throat, relaxed head, relaxed face, relaxed jaw. How
Right.
important is it to have perfectly sounding vowels to make our choir sound good?
That's a great one. Well, you're talking about resonance and you're talking about blend. And of course, we all have to have agree on where the vowel is. And there's a lot of possibilities. I'm just going to go through, this would be better if it was an audio thing, but a little thing, I call it the ah meter. And you're going to take your hand and you're going to put it kind of right up next to your ears in a, like a high five thing, your palm is forward. and you're just going to sing, oh. That's the correct way. Now we can go really too far forward and make that hand come forward and bring our resonance frame in front and go, ah, you know the difference. Or we can go from that tall spot, we can go too far back. Oh, you hear me swallowing it. Okay, kind of like Russell Crowe and Les Mis. Oh, you know, swallowing the sound. So
And
you
now I
just
know what
need to
I'm going to
make
be watching tonight.
so you need to make sure that you put the vowels in a tall spot. Now this can get tricky because some people can say tall and then they start to do this and they want everything to be in a fish lip and, you know, covered up. That's not blending. Blending is me saying I need oh, and you singing oh, and I'll have the whole choir sing that and I'll have one person go, can you sing the sideways one, the east-west one? Ah, and everybody else sing the tall north-south one. Oh, and you'll hear that one ah sticking out. So that's how we promote blend. We say we need to all have the same vowel. And that takes a little while, but I think it's not achieved necessarily in the repertoire. I think it's achieved in the warm-up. If you're doing your warm-up like Z-I-E, Z-I-E, and you're thinking space, you're doing a kinesthetic to get that lift in there. You're going to get that. If they just are going like pounding on the piano, they're not going to get that feel. So it's all in how you model for them, which brings us back to one of our first points is that if you don't feel that you're a singer and you're in front of singers, you need to become a singer in some way, shape, or form. You need to take some voice lessons. You need to get in an ensemble so that you have that experience. Otherwise, I think it's going to be extremely difficult for you to do anything more than teaching the notes and the rhythm. And that's certainly not in music. That's just one very small part of it. So that's a huge challenge for instrumentalists to do. Now, hopefully, most instrumentalists have had some choral experience, and they're not totally fish out of water. But yeah, that's a big thing. And then after that, I don't know if you have a follow-up question for that because I have another area after. But go ahead and do you have another question about that?
Um, Not so much about that, but I was thinking about additional challenges, like maybe we don't play piano so good.
Right. If you don't play piano so good, that's actually better because a lot of pianists overplay and play all the time. And what does the human voice have anything to do with the piano, how it's produced? A piano is produced by hitting a key, which pushes a hammer against a string and sounds the string. The voice is produced by air flowing up and over and through, and the vocal bands just automatically hearing the pitch. So I think using the piano as an initial pitch source, you know, bum, 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 and there's your, you know, key, and there you go, is good. Or playing one part maybe and singing another part to get the parts rolling. But I think the less piano in rehearsal, the better your choir becomes, the more independent they become. There's a difference between an accompaniment and playing parts. But also the choir, if you're doing accompanied music, needs to know what the accompaniment is like, but they also need to be able to sing their parts a cappella without the accompaniment to make sure that they're solid. So I think if you're not a good pianist, that is, well, first of all, you need to be good enough pianist to play one part and sing the other, okay? And to give pitches in the proper order and to rescue as need be. But if you're not a great pianist, it's not necessarily going to be a bad thing for your choir as long as you make it up with your voice.
Right.
That makes sense?
It does. Yeah, totally. When I was first starting to teach elementary school, because I was a trained secondary instrumentalist, but then I got this
Mm-hmm.
job teaching K-5, which meant that we were going to be doing a whole heck of a lot of singing. And again, I had
Right.
a relatively strong vocal background,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not a strong pianist. So I ended up
Mm-hmm.
meeting with a mentor teacher who had just retired from teaching elementary in the same area as me. And
Mm-hmm.
he recommended, well, you could play along with some guitar, or you could try and play the piano. He goes, but the real fun is when you just teach them to sing a cappella.
Right.
And I saw
Right.
that as a challenge. I'm like, yes, all my students will be able to sing in tune a cappella. And that was what
Mm-hmm.
I strove for.
Right. That's why I say sometimes it's a mixed blessing if you're not a pianist because you have to rely on other things, which makes them more vocally aware, which
Mm-hmm.
is good. Mhm. And then you have the whole nother layer of choral music, which is not found in instrumental music, which is the diction. And uh, it's kind of like doing a musical and doing all the sets and getting all the lines learned and all the blocking and everybody knows their thing, and then you turn it over to the sound guy, and the mic's not on and this is not happening, and you get feedback. And it's like, wait, there's another layer here, that needs to be a part of the production. Well, the diction is that layer. It's I think it's the final layer, and I'm a big person about not using words initially, but just using neutral syllables. So if we're going to sing "'Tis a Gift to Be Simple," we're going to learn it. It also helps their sight reading because they don't have the words to rely on. But then when you add the words, "'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free," we cannot sing the way we talk,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't understand how to modify that. So the first comes with actually speaking the text as it would be sung. "'Tis a gift to be simple," instead of "'Tis a gift to be simple," kind of biting. So "'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift." And then how would we sing "free"? To be free. We would modify the vowels. There's all kinds of issues with diction, especially in the English language. I think the English language is far harder to sing. Latin is my preferred easy first language. And then a lot of the South African languages are very easy to sing because they're just neutral syllables. And the only reference that the kids have is what you teach them. So if you teach it to them correctly, they're going to sing it correctly. They won't have their spoken habits, you know what I mean, to get in the way. But there's just so many things that are involved with diction. R's, for instance, now. Praise,
I was hoping you'd get
diphthongs,
there.
everything. You just have to study that. You have to know singer's diction. And that's what I mean when I say there's layers of elements to it, just like there would be layers of elements to teaching instrumental music. Diction is a huge part of that. So you want to go for the pure vowels. In English, you want to go for the diphthong, where you hold the first part of the vowel and then you put the second. I use hand motions all the time, kinesthetics. So if I'm drawing out a vowel, I'll have the students pull across their body and then flip flip for the consonant. So still a bee, and you'll hear libby, actually like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
libby instead of still a bee, and they go to the L too early. There's just a million things that are going to trap you if you don't really study diction and find out how to do it. Yeah. That's what one of my books is about. So
No,
there's that.
I love it because you're just reinforcing for me so much of what I taught my own students. So thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Glad you
Hooray! I
did.
guess I can teach choral.
Yay.
Um, awesome. So one final question I kind of have: how do we pick repertoire? Maybe we're teaching a middle school choir, but
Mhm.
where do we get them started on two-part, three-part stuff?
Right. There's a part hierarchy that's commonly known for choral music, and at the bottom is unison. At the very top, the last thing you want to do is homophonic parts that are happening at the same time, but three different notes or two different notes. That's the hardest. So you do unison, and then you do partner songs where you have two songs going on at the same time, but they overlap. You can do an ostinato and a unison. You build very slowly so that they get the independence. Two part is okay, but usually a descant part over the melody is a little easier. Once you start getting two simultaneous parts, that becomes more difficult. And if they're not used to it, it's going to trip them up. There are a lot of great writers for elementary music, but I think what you need to look for is great unison lines, and then maybe either an ostinato or a descant or a simple call and response. Part one sings and holds the note, and part two, sings over that, and that back and forth, that will help them obtain some part singing skills. And then you build from there as those are done. And that's a whole huge discussion to have. But there's something called the part singing hierarchy that you could look that up and see what the progression is from unison to part.
Fantastic. So we've learned so much from you today, Christine. I feel like
Good.
it's been so good and such a great refresher, even for someone like me who has done this, at
Hmm.
least in part. So where do we learn more? Where can we learn more from you?
Well, you can go to my website, christinebass.com, and you can look at the resources. Basically, I have a vocal pedagogy resource, which is called Vocal Transformation. And I just did it for elementary for the first time, but I usually do secondary school. But it's the same, concepts for secondary and even college. So it's just great vocal technique, group vocal technique for choirs. And I start with it. I have a DVD out that has my ninth graders in the beginning of the year singing do re mi fa sol la ti do, all wrong, without any help, and how do I change that to a good choir sound, and what kind of things go into that. So that's a resource. And then my second main resource is my new book called Front Loading Your Choral Rehearsal: Constructing for Success, which is a book that it's an ebook or a hard text, but it has 60 uploads of actual rehearsals. So little clippets of the very first rehearsal I have on something, and how to introduce a piece, and what do you do, how do you approach something that's got two themes. It's just chock full of all that kind of stuff. And the reason I have had these kind of products, and the people are very excited about them, is it's very, very practical, very hands-on. It's me teaching real kids in real time, mistakes and all, and how do you handle it. And I always wanted to be a fly on somebody's classroom wall, and that's what this is like. So you're able to see it, you're able to use it, you're able to understand it, and a lot of people just let their kids watch it right along with them, and it's like having another choir to practice with. So I'd highly recommend those two products that are you can see them on my website.
I love it. And what is your Where the Boys Are DVD?
Okay, that's my other product. That's recruiting, engaging, and maintaining tenors and basses. And I think that when I started publishing with Hal Leonard, I asked them, well, do you have a project for me? And they're like, we get asked all the time, how can we get more boys in our program? And I started off in my high school with 11 boys and ended up with 110. So how do you recruit them? What do you do? So that's all about doing things that are going to appeal to all kinds of guys, the theater guys, the jock guys, the intellect guys. That there's as many different guys out there as there are bodies. It's not that you have one pat answer, but there are certain things vocally that they relate to. And I need tenors and basses in my choir who are going to and they're going to have that sound. And if I don't go after giving them the tools to have those sounds, which I use actually from Vocal Transformation and from the first DVD, then they won't learn how to use it. And once, guys are so excited once they get it, and they're like, whoa, we got it. And then they just take off, and they become your next ambassadors for, come on, doing choir, we're having a blast, da, da, da. So that's what that's about, recruiting boys, because I've had a lot of experience with that.
That's awesome. And you have a really rigorous schedule of appearances too.
Yeah, it's good. I love to go out and do work with honors choirs, and I like to go to the conventions and present my workshops and work with music educators all across the country. So, and I'm doing a little bit. I'm going to South Korea next fall and getting out there a little bit across the sea.
Thank you for your time, Christine. Do you have any final words?
Nope, just that I'm looking forward to working with you in the future.
Awesome. As you probably gathered, Christine has so many more practical, relevant, and truly powerful ways to help you be a better choral director and for your students to be better singers. Check out all of her resources at christinebass.com. Her book, Where the Boys Are, may be particularly helpful as you go about recruiting for your choirs next year. You can also find links to many of her offerings on the show notes for this episode at smartmusic.com/blog. Simply type in the search bar episode 76 or Christine Bass. It'll come up either way. My wish for you now is that you take time for yourself and less time for your anxieties about next year. Use this time to strengthen yourself against the coming challenges, because I guarantee they will continue to be challenging. If you need to go back and listen to some of our episodes on battling burnout or creating a lifestyle you love, now is a great time to do that. Thank you for spending this time with me and for spending this time with yourself. You absolutely deserve it. And you deserve to keep teaching on.